This is the description process that the head of sports administration would conduct. It's what I have been asked to discuss in my professional business speech class, and my name is Joshua Kerensky. On slide 2, you'll notice how I've put out like an index of how this presentation is going to go. It basically states what goes into conducting a sports practice. Slide 2 says on it, description of decision process, identifying strengths and weaknesses, notifying players and staff, planning the session, conducting the session, and evaluating the session. This is all in relation to a soccer practice and the specific sports practice. So your decision process is extremely important. It's the first thing that I'll be talking about on slide 3, as you'll notice as we progress. Identifying your strengths and weaknesses is also very important, something that you can't just forget about. Strengths might get you the wins, might get you the big W, but if your weaknesses bring you down in important games, you're going to lose titles, and this is unfortunate. So we've got to identify both. You've got to notify your players and staff as well. So you can't just have a practice and not let anybody know. You've got to keep them in the loop, keep everybody up to date. Then you've got to plan the session. Once you've planned it, then you can conduct it. And once you've conducted that session, you've got to obviously evaluate it and see where you went right and wrong, and weigh up all the different options. On slide 3, you'll see that I've spoken about the decision process and how frequently you need to conduct your practice sessions. This directly relates to the team's strengths and weaknesses. So I'm going to stress this quite a lot. Strengths and weaknesses are very important, especially when it comes to the description process and the description process I have chosen. If a team struggles defensively, obviously you've got to work on that. You can't just let that weakness come up in a game and then you lose the game. That wouldn't be very wise. So as a coach, you're going to consistently be working harder on your weaknesses and work less on your strengths. And that brings me to my next slide 4, which is identifying strengths and weaknesses. Every team has a strength and a weakness. Some teams have more strengths and less weaknesses. So you've got to plan each session to work both with your strengths and your weaknesses. You can't just work on one thing, because if you're working on your weaknesses, which is for instance defense, you obviously got to have some sort of offense to work against that defense. So you've got to take that into account, that you're going to be working on both things at the same time, but you've got to pay more attention to the weaknesses, or for instance in our situation, the defense. You've got to encourage hard work on your weaknesses. You can't just let a weakness, you can't practice a weakness and make sure that you try and make it better without working hard at it. And you've got to make sure the players know that that's where they're weak. You've got to also keep your strengths consistent. You can't weigh the options and be like, well, my weaknesses are heavier and they're bringing me down, so that's all I'm going to focus on. You've got to keep both consistent, otherwise you're just going to start losing games. Notifying your players and staff is very important aspect of coaching. The use of modern technologies such as cell phones, Facebook, and Twitter, or email, are all still used and are used quite heavily and frequently in different sports associations. Just because it's fast, everybody has a cell phone on them. They're all connected to Twitter and Facebook, and that also means that you're connected to the internet so you can get your emails. This gives no player an excuse, or a staff member an excuse, to miss a practice without letting the coach know. So if you notify your players and they don't notify you back and let you know, then you know that you've accomplished your aspect and that you can discipline the player or the staff member for being late or missing the session. On slide 6, you'll notice that I speak about planning the session. You've got to obviously select exercises. You can't just randomly arrive at the practice and conduct it. Some people do that, and that's why they don't have very successful teams. You've got to plan towards previous teams' performances. So you can't just take the current performance. You've got to take the entire season or a couple of games into hand. So if you've come off the back of 3 straight wins, your team's on a high. You've got to keep that going. You've got to keep the practices happy and motivated, and keep them on the right track. If it's the opposite and they've come off 3 losses, you've got to try motivate them again, get them working hard, try make sure that they practice hard, and so that they become better players. Lastly, second to last, you look at conducting the actual practice, and this is probably the easiest part of being a coach and this whole process. You've obviously just got to be timely. You've got to set up all your equipment correctly and at the right times. You can't arrive 5 minutes before practice and just expect it to be there and set up. You as the coach have to set the initiative. You've got to be specific and direct with instructions. So you can't say you need to go over there to a player. He doesn't know where there is, or she doesn't know where there is. So you've got to say you've got to go to that cone, the bright pink one, or you've got to run off that cone and hit that zone that I've indicated with cones. This is a great way of being specific, and it helps players become better players. You've got to coach the players and leave work at the office. You can't come to the field and still have a piece of paper on you and saying, well, I think I'm going to go with this practice, and bringing up your laptop and doing other things at the session. You've got to be very involved in the session. Try get interactive with the kids, or try to do something that's not just standing on the sidelines and boring. Lastly, you have to evaluate this session that you've conducted. So it's the most critical, and it is probably the most boring. It sets you up for your next session. So if you evaluate immediately after your session, you most likely are going to remember things more easier than if you do it a week later. So make sure that it's consistently done and regularly done, not every 2 weeks or so. It consists, obviously, this whole evaluating, it consists of two parts. There's obviously, have you achieved all the goals that you set out for that session? And how are you going to use that, what you did in the session, to prepare you for the next session? And that's extremely important, linking those two together. If you don't, then evaluating a session is pointless. And that's the process and how it works, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.